far-right Israeli minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, is actually calling for an end to the Doha talks and openly advocating ethnic cleansing. How seriously should we take such rhetoric then? And what does it tell us about the internal pressures within the Israeli government?
Well, it tells us a lot about the theatrics, the theatrics of Israeli right-wing politics. Because for many years, plain vanilla right-wing Israeli politicians, that would be, Likudniks, members of the Likud party, for many years, they were very friendly towards Qatar and Turkey. And by a cruel irony, Qatar and Turkey, which were very close for many years to the Likud party, they were also funding Hamas, and Qatar and Turkey were even, it is said, arming and equipping Hamas, which every now and then blew a bus or a car or a restaurant in Tel Aviv. They were funded and armed mostly by Qatar, Turkey, and Iran, and the Likud party was very close to Turkey and Qatar. So it shows you also the hypocrisy of part of the Israeli military industrial security apparatus, right? Because of course they knew that Qatar and Turkey were arming Hamas, and at the same time they were closing their eyes and they were looking the other way. So if you do so and you know it, you're a hypocrite. Now the very small ultra right-wing parties like Itamar Ben-Gvir's party, they are spins off of the Kash movement of Rabbi Meir Kahane of New York City. So even though, Ben-Gvir himself is of Iraqi Middle Eastern origin, the ideas of that small ultra right-wing party came from America. They came from some right-wing rabbis in New York City. And they're, of course, very racist, extremely right-wing, extremely racist. But at the same time, by a cruel irony, what Itamar Ben-Gvir is saying is interesting, because he's telling, Netanyahu, stop the theater, stop the hypocrisy. So he's telling the Likud, you guys, are friendly with Qatar, and you want to negotiate indirectly with Hamas using, Doha or Istanbul or Ankara as an indirect route to negotiating with Hamas because you don't want to negotiate directly with the Palestinians. Please, Netanyahu, stop the theater. Let's go all right-wing. So in a way, it's an interesting piece of information which Itamar Ben-Gvir is giving us here. It's all theater. It's all theatrics.
Mm-hmm.
Of course,
Qatar is actually saying that negotiations are still in the preliminary phase, with no direct talks yet underway. So is Israel using the battlefield escalation as a negotiation tactic, maybe?
They are, but Hamas is playing the part of the useful idiot. Because quite honestly, when you negotiate a truce, right? This is like really the basics, this is like military strategy and diplomacy 101, the basics. When you negotiate a truce or when you sign a hudna or a treaty or a peace treaty, you do it with the enemy. You don't sign a truce or a peace treaty with your friend, right? You do it with your enemy. And so the whole idea of, oh no, we cannot negotiate with Hamas. And Hamas, they are based, the leadership of Hamas, be they civilian or military or whatever, they are based 5 or 10 kilometers from the Israeli border. And the Israeli military intelligence, they know exactly where each and every one of them is based. It's a whole theater. So if they want to negotiate with them, why not cross the border or bring them there? They live 5 or 6 kilometers from the Israeli border anyway, and talk to them directly. Why say, oh no, we need to do it indirectly via Istanbul and Doha and Islamabad and Lahore? It's ridiculous. So what I'm coming at, there's no will. There's no will. There's no bona fide. There's no bona fide, sincere will from the Israelis to negotiate.
Mr. Fazli, Netanyahu's latest meeting with Trump in Washington coincided with Trump doubling down on support for Gaza, immigration, and rejecting a Palestinian state altogether. So how does this affect the legitimacy of the ongoing mediation?
It's complicated because, on the face of it, everything being, relative, many in Europe and the Middle East are hostile to Trump. And so on the face of it, superficially, many experts in Europe or the Middle East, they say, oh, it would have been better with Joe Biden, or if Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris were in the White House instead of Trump, the Likud party or Benjamin Netanyahu would have never dared to be that brutal with the Palestinian civilians in Gaza. I happen to hold the opposite view. I think that, quite honestly, Biden, Clinton, Obama, whatever, that would have changed very little. What's true about Trump is he has no interest in the Gaza Strip or Palestine. So Trump has bigger fish to fry. He's a neo-realist. He's a cold-blooded neo-realist. And he believes that America has to focus everything, all its military, financial, intellectual, political resources on one issue, which is the technological financial rivalry with China. So he's pivoting to the Asia-Pacific area very fast. He's neglecting, and look at the way he treated, Ukraine and the Ukraine war, or NATO member states. He's treating NATO member states and the Ukrainians also in the same manner, which is very harsh, because he believes he needs to focus on China. So he doesn't care about the Gaza Strip or the West Bank or the Palestinians. So the whole issue of the Gaza Riviera, there was a plan when Trump first entered the White House 6 months ago of turning the Gaza Strip into a Riviera, the Gaza Riviera, an Eastern Mediterranean version of Las Vegas or Atlantic City, with roulettes and blackjack tables and belly dancers. Of course, it's a joke. It's a cruel joke, but the mere fact that he said it in a very serious manner, and he invited the King of Jordan to discuss the issue, that says a lot. That he doesn't consider the Gaza issue to be a serious issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about the Palestinians? They say that the key sticking points remain on aid access and Israeli withdrawal mechanisms. Now, in light of the humanitarian catastrophe we're witnessing, can any Israeli assurances be taken seriously?
Well, at this stage, and I don't want to sound cynical, right? But at this stage, it may be too little too late, because, what happened following the policies, and everyone is blaming Netanyahu. To be honest, Netanyahu is part of a long line. So it's a long process, which was started with Yitzhak Shamir, Ariel Sharon. So it's a very long process. And Netanyahu is just continuing these policies. So after 30, 35 years of creeping annexation of Palestinian lands, there isn't much left to save. So now the Palestinians are reduced strategically to focus on negotiating the delivery of first aid to hospitals and civilians in Gaza to avoid them starving to death. So that is what they're focusing on. They even forgot the West Bank. The West Bank should be 100 times more important than the Gaza Strip. But the power of Israel is such that they are forcing Arab governments and the UN and the Palestinians to negotiate how fast or how slow can they deliver humanitarian aid to Khan Yunis. This is the only thing they're negotiating on now.
Mm-hmm. Well, the deal on the table reportedly includes a 60-day truce and detainee exchange. Do you think this adequately reflects the Palestinian and Hamas demands, especially regarding a full Israeli withdrawal?
Maybe, but once again, they're like negotiating and arguing and shouting and killing every day, 50 or 100 Palestinians. For what? So what is the outcome? So what does Hamas want? And what does the ruling Likud party want? And they're both to blame. So I think, it's not that Hamas is innocent, or they're both equally to blame for the current situation. What is the outcome? So after they negotiate these terms and hopefully they sign a truce, right? Mm-hmm. What happens next? What is the outcome? The real prize, if people want to salvage what is left of the Palestinian cause, is not the Gaza Strip, right? The Gaza Strip is a big open-air prison 80% of the land is desert. It's horrible. So the real prize, the real thing that is left perhaps to salvage, to create an embryo of viable Palestinian state is the West Bank. And that issue has been completely canceled and erased from negotiations. And that is terrible.
Mm-hmm.